Townspeople in Culiacan are having to adjust to a new reality. One where bodies turn up on the street daily.
The US-Mexico border has become a war zone as the cartels ramp up their ruthless violence to levels never seen before. Mass shootings, abductions, and bodies dumped in the streets. It's like something out of a horror movie. And now, these grisly sights aren't confined to Mexico anymore either. They're spilling out into the US southern states. The cartels are packing serious heat and have even put out the order to start taking out US border agents.
Mexican cartels are giving members permission to, quote, shoot at U.S. Border Patrol agents.
As the situation spirals out of control, both governments are scrambling to fight back. Will cracking down harder just lead to more bloodshed? And can cartels' culture of extreme violence ever be stopped?
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, le digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
This is the brutal reality of Mexican cartels.
They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them.
It's hard to imagine living in an area where decapitations and kidnappings are normalized and where kids can encounter dead bodies on their way to school. But because of a few criminal organizations, millions of people live like this. And it's not just them who are affected. For example, the CJ&G is largely responsible for the destructive fentanyl epidemic in the United States, and the negative effects go all the way up to the geopolitics. Mexican cartels are brutal and destructive in just about 1,000 ways. Let's explore the most violent and powerful cartels in power today. But before we go on, I must warn you. Today's video shares some really graphic details of torture and death. Before we delve into the thick of it, we must understand the wider context of Mexican cartels and why they are so destructive. Mexico and the United States share a giant border of almost 2,000 miles. Their cultures and businesses are closely intertwined. In 2018 alone, trade between Mexico and the US generated $671 billion. But lately, tensions have been growing between the two countries for one single reason: cartels.
These cartels should be defined as a commercial insurgency and major threat to the U.S. national security interests.
Reportedly, cartels make between $19 to $29 billion a year just from the U.S. Mexico is the world's 13th largest economy, and the U.S. is only second to China. Today, Mexico is on the rise as one of the most cost-effective places to locate manufacturing operations. Lots of these operations are now leaving China and moving to Mexico for better skilled and lower paid labor. For geopolitical reasons, balancing economic power like that is good, but all of this is in peril because the cartels seem to be in control of the government, and this is affecting the American government's outlook on Mexico as a whole.
If Americans start to think of Mexicans as drug runners again, regardless of why, that damages our most productive trading relationship and our most brilliant opportunity for our future right out of the gate.
Why are we saying cartels are in control? Well, just look at Ovidio Guzman's 2019 arrest attempt, also known as Black Tuesday.
When Mexican forces approached Lopez's home, Cartel Guzman opened fire from within. However, after an intensive shootout, they were able to gain entry to the house and apprehend Lopez, who surrendered unarmed.
On October 17, 2019, the Mexican military raided Ovidio's home and arrested him for a long list of crimes.
They now say this drug lord, nicknamed the Mouse, has ordered the murders of informants, a rival drug trafficker, and a popular Mexican singer who refused to perform at his wedding.
But as his brothers, El Chapo's sons, got word of this, hell rained on the officers. 10 officers and 19 cartel members died, and a dozen others were seriously injured as a whole war was unleashed.
Pase, por favor, pase, por favor. Vamos los tres. Tranquilo. Aquí, señor. Afuera. Tranquilo. Listo. Anda aquí, tomamos. ¿Traes armas?
The message was simple. You don't mess with the Sinaloa cartel. You don't mess with El Chapo's sons. Ovidio himself seemed to try to stop the massacre before it all happened.
Diles que paren todo.
Ya no quiero que haya desmadre.
Hey, Ovidio, páralo.
But this organization is larger than life, and its ego is fragile. They're playing hardball, knowing they can intimidate the government and seize control of money and power. Sadly, it worked. That year, Ovidio was released from custody and was free to do the Sinaloa cartel's bidding for 4 more years, until his 2023 arrest. Mexico's president explained his decision.
No puede valer más la captura de un delincuente que las vidas de las personas.
Falco Ernst, a senior analyst for the International Crisis Group in Mexico, who explained that Ovidio López Guzmán's release set a terrible precedent and communicated a message that the state, including the army, could be blackmailed and was not in control.
Exactly. Now the cartels know violence works. So in the infamous war on drugs, each cartel ups their brutal game, knowing this is the only currency that keeps them at the top of the game. Mexican cartels are deemed a regional security threat in Mexico and the US. And of course, they're a threat to all those who stand in their way. In the eyes of the cartels, even looking at them the wrong way can earn you a death sentence. Let's look at Mexico's most brutal cartels in power. Today, the Los Zetas cartel is not as powerful as the CJ&G or the Sinaloa, but its sheer brutality inspired the other two and laid the grounds for all the horror that's been happening since the 2000s.
They are killing machines with no soul.
The core of Los Zetas' belief stands in their name. Los Zetas means disease, and in Mexico, this is the tactical radio code for military officers. Los Zetas was the first militarized cartel because they literally started out as an army. In 1997, Los Zetas was formed as the Gulf Cartel's army. Their kingpin at the time, Ociel Cardenas Guillen, hired up retired Army Lieutenant Arturo Guzmán de Sina to recruit the most violent deserters from the military special forces. De Sina's former radio code Z1 named the army. If this sounds cool, guess again, it only upped the violence tenfold.
The first Zeta he recruited was Arturo Guzmán de Sena. So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
This way, the Zetas became unstoppable. What cartel could face an army with special training and military weapons? Not even the police were equipped with weapons as tough as theirs. There was another problem too. As the Zetas realized their power, their bosses started glorifying brutality. The more violent you were, the higher up in the army you could go. The Zetas even gave honor medals to the most violent soldiers.
So the Zetas really upped the ante of violence within their conflict and their use of terror. I think a lot of this comes from the fact they were from the military and they had this instruction of how you defeat insurgencies, this anti-insurgency training that had originated in the United States, and this idea that you control territories through the use of terror.
And because they were becoming unstoppable, Los Zetas also encouraged other cartels to take arms and become more violent. Then, in the early 2000s, came the war on drugs, the government's promise to put an end to the cartel violence. Ironically, this made cartel violence much, much worse. In 2002, Arturo de Sina was killed by the Mexican military. This was the kingpin strategy: eliminate cartel leaders and bring their cartel down. This had worked a decade before in Colombia with Pablo Escobar, but now it would lead to pure chaos. After Ociel Cardenas was arrested and extradited to the US, Los Zetas decided to split from the Gulf Cartel and form their own separate entity in 2010. And this worked better than they could have ever imagined.
You had this small unit which grew and grew, that as the Zetas inside the Gulf Cartel, until eventually it was like a whole army within the Gulf Cartel that would rise up saying, we don't need you anymore, we're going to take this for ourselves.
As a super efficient and highly organized military group, Los Zetas thrived. But of course, this started a war with the Gulf Cartel. In August 2010, authorities discovered an unmarked grave holding the bodies of 72 undocumented immigrants. Los Zetas killed them all on a hunch. They were afraid they'd be recruited by the Gulf Cartel.
This time, 193 bodies were recovered. People had been tortured and mutilated. Women had been raped. And reports came back that men had been forced to fight each other to the death with hammers and machetes.
In August 2011, they did the same to 193 people, but this time, it was even worse. Dozens of women were violated, and the men who were killed were tortured for hours prior to this. Other men were forced to fight each other to the death, while Los Zetas members stood by, watched, and laughed. Whoever survived this ordeal was recruited into the Zetas cartel, because if you're ruthless and desensitized enough to kill your own friends, you're good enough for the cartel. Except these people had no choice. It was kill or be killed. In August of the same year, the Zetas set fire to an entire casino in Monterrey, killing 50 people. Their only problem was the casino refused to pay protection money. And in 2014, Los Zetas committed an unimaginable atrocity. They suspected 2 men from the town Allende had stolen money from the cartel. They decided to punish the whole town. Los Zetas' militarized army raided Allende and destroyed everything in their sight. 80 homes were reduced to ashes, and somewhere between 300 and 500 people died that day. You know it's a real-life horror movie when you can't even estimate the kill count within 100. This is the life of people living in the areas controlled by Los Zetas.
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, le digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
And that's not all. Los Zetas are also known for their horrific torture methods. In 2020, the Irish Times reported the discovery of 12 kitchens Los Zetas used to cook, well, humans. The sight would scar even the most seasoned detectives.
Bloody handprints on walls, stained clothes, plastic cable ties, machetes and, as one person observes, the crunch of bones beneath a thick blanket of ash.
These kitchens have become so well known in the regions of Mexico where the Los Zetas operate that people now use the term zacahuil to describe cooking humans. That's a traditional Mexican corn dish, but you're probably not going to try it now. And it gets even worse. Los Zetas don't burn their victims quickly.
They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them.
And if they don't cook their victims, they'll burn them with diesel so that the process is as slow as possible.
They burn these individuals in a 55-gallon drum using diesel because diesel burns slower.
In 2012, Los Zetas' kingpin, Heriberto Lozcano, was gunned down by the Mexican military, and his right-hand man, Miguel Ángel Trevino Morales, took charge. He took violence to a whole new level. Heartbreakingly, he would kidnap his victims' children and boil them alive. He personally did this to babies too.
Los Zetas are making sure that no one, not even authorities, dares stand in their way.
To say Los Zetas are brutal would be an understatement.
They've put them in acid and watched their bodies disintegrate. They have fed them to wild animals.
But you see, their very brutality would be their downfall. In the 2010s, Los Zetas were controlling every kind of illegal activity in many eastern regions of Mexico.
They'd also take over the local drug selling, shaking down, kidnapping, stealing cars, selling pirated goods. They started taking over corrupt trade unions. So it wasn't just a fight about the drug trade of the United States. It was a fight about controlling every inch of territory and all of the businesses in this territory.
But Morales kept recruiting the worst, most violent, psychopathic men. Within a decade, the once organized military army turned into a gang of mad dogs looking for a kill. And when you gather these people together, it's not long before they start fighting each other too. Los Zetas are still active as of 2023, but their organization and business savvy have taken a serious fall. Now they rely on kidnapping and extortion as their main sources of income, and they no longer compete with the giant Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels. However, Los Zetas' horrifying legacy lives through the next cartel. If Los Zetas left a lesson for the Jalisco New Generation cartel, it's the more violent, the better. Well, that and the military weapons.
The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Sheer brutality instead of bribery can be used to intimidate authorities and seize control over Mexico's many trades.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana. Vives el terror.
CJ&G began with one man, Namasio Aseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho. He was born in July 1966 and grew up in a poor family of avocado farmers. In the 1980s, he moved to the US illegally, but he didn't lay low. He and his brother went straight into the drug trafficking business. After 2 arrests, he was deported back to Mexico. So in the 1990s, he joined the Milenio cartel, but the Milenio kingpins were killed or arrested, one by one, and the cartel was losing power. Eventually, it split into tinier factions, one of which was El Menchos. Initially, it was called Los Torcidos, or the Twisted Ones. Then it became CJ&G.
The Millennium Cartel splintered over, and one of those splinters was Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, the CJ&G.
Today, the CJ&G is deemed Mexico's most violent cartel.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJ&G, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
Imagine this being your proudest achievement. In an ironic twist, after being deported to Mexico, El Mencho worked for the local police for a few months. But it's likely he just did that to learn the ropes about organized attacks and military strategy. This is what the Mexican authorities found at one of the CJ&G bases.
That the cartel possesses highly sophisticated armament, including machine guns and grenade launchers.
The army is structured, organized, and trained in warfare. This means that they are always ready to attack or defend their headquarters.
And in July, footage would emerge of that CG&G convoy. These gunmen call themselves the Elite Group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho. They're armed with assault rifles with grenade launchers attached to the barrel, heavy machine guns, and also this gun. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. It's a powerful weapon that the CG&G loves to show off.
But they rarely defend. CJ&G's philosophy is to attack everyone before they even do anything. Intimidation is their main tactic.
They dress in army-style uniforms and make a great show of using heavy military-grade weaponry.
They have a very intelligent strategy, which is basically branding themselves and looking like paramilitary power. They do have their full letters, right? The CJ&G on their vests. They dressed as properly military. They also have these high caliber guns. They have what they call those monstruos, which are really basically like man-made tanks, you know?
And unlike other Mexican cartels, CJ&G doesn't just attack rival cartels for power, money, and territory. They attack anyone, from police officers to civilians. They want to spread a message. They are in charge now, and they're ruling by fear. In April 2015, the CJ&G ambushed dozens of police officers and trapped them in a corner. 15 officers died simply because they were on the wrong side of the war. From the cartel's perspective,
the officers were trapped and continually shot at by members of the CJ&G, killing about 15 of them.
And when the CJ&G fights rival cartels, they literally reduce towns to ashes.
El aguaje se convirtió en un pueblo fantasma. Las casas pues ya no son las mismas, todas están balaceadas. Antes aquí es donde estaban los Jaliscos. Esto era la barricada de ellos.
One time, El Mencho found out the Mexican military were planning to arrest two of his most trusted men, El Ere and El Apa. So he began an operation to distract the authorities. This meant creating bigger trouble elsewhere. El Mencho's sicarios set fire to 25 outlets in Guanajuato. They were shooting at random people and blowing up cars just to send the message that El Mencho is in charge. The end goal? An incredible amount of money. And they slowly infiltrated every business there is in Mexico.
The economical power behind the Cartel Jalisco, they literally started with avocados, so they were farmers. They literally started moving from avocados to chemical precursors to make drugs like methamphetamine. It's like, okay, so what the U.S. market like? They like their avocados from Mexico and their from Mexico.
One reason for El Mencho's success is his ability to use market and consumer charges to his advantage. Initially, the CJ&G produced just methamphetamine, but as soon as El Mencho saw that consumer demand changed, he moved to heroin production. Today, the CJ&G is known as the core distributor of fentanyl, which has surpassed heroin as America's deadliest banned drug in recent years. Yeah, El Mencho deals with the absolute worst substances on the black market.
We have had, more overdose deaths in 1 year than we did of COVID deaths in our city.
Fentanyl made thousands of people homeless, physically and emotionally destroyed, and completely unable to let go of this self-destructive addiction.
It doesn't last long, so you're sick again. Like heroin you can do in the morning and you can be all good till tomorrow. Like fentanyl you can withdraw like 3 times a day.
Around 1% of fentanyl users will die. This number is huge. And in the context of this video, it just goes to show how many people the Mexican cartels are hurting. The CJ&G even infiltrated Mexico's profitable avocado industry, the very industry El Mencho's family worked in, legally. 400,000 people have jobs insured by the avocado industry in Mexico. Avocado consumption in the United States tripled between 2001 and 2023. Of course, this screamed business opportunity to El Mencho. The CJ&G attacked farmers, stole their farms, or threatened to kill them and their families if they didn't surrender their profits.
Your orchard is sealed off, you have cameras everywhere, and you have guns. It's so hard for me to wrap my head around. The protection is all because you are growing this delicious fruit.
Así es, porque if you're doing well, they kill you, or disappear you, or they come and pull you and your family out of your house. And they take away your orchard, and they cultivate it and take all the money.
Against their will, most avocado farmers in Mexico became a part of the cartels. They either side with them or end up dead.
In Michoacán, the avocado industry, first they start like taxing them with like 10% of their gains, and then they say like, why it's not easier just to take over? Give me like the property titles, or I will kidnap your daughter, I will extort you. If you don't, I'm gonna shoot you.
But this only made the cartels more confident that they could have a monopoly over the avocado industry. And as avocados became more and more popular, their prices went up, and so did the cartel violence.
All this crime is a consequence of the increase of price of avocado. Now all of this has exploded. The extortion, kidnappings, you have to pay for protection. I'm afraid of losing my family or having them lose me.
The CJ&G is truly brutal, and it doesn't stop with business owners, rival cartels, or police officers. They're even targeting the government itself.
Cartel Jalisco, they are very well consolidated as one group. And so that means that they can really put up really organized attacks against the Mexican government. And all that violence is only to have leverage in the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create these chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say like, okay, do you want more or shall we negotiate this?
The only hope in stopping the CJ&G's violence lies in the recent rumor of El Mencho's death. In 2020, it was reported that El Mencho suffered from kidney disease, and he had built his own private hospital to treat it. In February 2022, unconfirmed reports came up that Mencho died in the hospital following a respiratory arrest. If this is true, the cartel will do its best to hide it. Rival cartels will swoop in for control the minute it's confirmed. However, if it's true, CJ&G will most likely crumble, as like any other cartel. It will split into smaller, warring factions without a unifying leader. But even if the CJ&G will dissolve over the next few years, there is still one giant that appears to be going nowhere, even after its leader was arrested. Everyone has heard of the Sinaloa cartel, and everyone's heard of El Chapo, but here's the catch. El Chapo was arrested in 2016 and extradited to the US in 2017. Still, the Sinaloa cartel remains Mexico's largest and most powerful cartel, even 7 years after its kingpin's downfall. The Sinaloa cartel's origins are older than the previous cartels we've covered. It was created by El Chapo and El Mayo in 1989 after the Guadalajara cartel crumbled into 3 smaller factions, Tijuana, Juarez, and Sinaloa. El Chapo and El Mayo had spent 10 years working for the Guadalajara cartel. In other words, for Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, aka El Padrino. That's Spanish for the Godfather. And it makes sense. El Padrino was the godfather of all modern cartels. That is to say, El Chapo learned from the best. And when El Padrino was arrested, he immediately seized the opportunity and took control of the Sinaloa region of Mexico, hence the name of his cartel. El Chapo knew what he had to do to grow his empire. Bribe officials to protect his smuggling routes, and use extreme violence against rival cartels to keep them terrified of the Sinaloa. His method was all too similar to that of Pablo Escobar in Colombia. Plata o plomo. Savvy and ruthless as he was, El Chapo infiltrated the government until he had several high-ranking officials on his payroll. So every time the Sinaloa cartel makes $1, some pennies enter the officials' pockets. This way, instead of fighting the Sinaloa cartel, the government protects them.
Why do you think they let you do what you do?
Porque la mayoría de las ganancias van a dar a ellos. Para los altos mandos del gobierno.
When El Chapo was arrested for the final time in 2016, some really nasty things were revealed at his trial. It turns out, he wasn't just a cold and calculated businessman ordering hits and deals from an ivory tower. He was a psychopathic murderer who loved getting his hands dirty. His former bodyguard describes several horrific accounts of El Chapo killing enemies with his bare hands and torturing them for days first.
He had burns made with an iron on his back. His shirt was stuck to his skin. He had burns made with a car lighter all over his body. His feet were burned.
El Chapo kept this poor man in a wooden structure for days on end. He interrogated him, but the man wouldn't say what El Chapo wanted to hear. So El Chapo would shoot him, but not fatally. Over and over again. He would bury him alive a few days later. And in 2010, El Chapo killed rival cartel member Hugo Hernandez. Then he cut off his face and sewed it to a soccer ball. The rest of his body was found, cut into tiny pieces, in 2 ice chests. His message was for the authorities.
Hernandez's face, sewn onto a football, was left in a plastic bag near City Hall. A note read, "Happy New Year, because this will be your last."
So it's not just the Sinaloa sicarios who were violent. Their boss is as brutal as it gets. Today, El Chapo is imprisoned inside the U.S.'s highest security federal prison, the Florence Supermax. It's a very tough place, and he will never walk free again. But his cartel's profits only increased after his departure. And it's thanks to his 4 sons, Los Chapitos, or the Little Chapos.
Judy, they are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin. As the I-Team has reported for several years, federal drug investigators here in Chicago consider El Chapo's sons in charge of the Sinaloa cartel that remains this area's largest trafficker of heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines.
Los Chapitos built brand new meth labs, increased production, and expanded trafficking routes in Mexico and into the U.S. It turns out they're even more business savvy than their father. As of 2023, the Sinaloa is Mexico's #1 enemy cartel.
The most powerful is the Sinaloa cartel. Almost the 70% of the world is infected by this cartel.
Now the Sinaloa employs similar methods to the CJ&G. They go straight after authorities, ambushing them, beating them, and killing dozens of officers at a time in massive shootouts. Their soldiers are completely desensitized to violence.
Have you all, killed people with these guns?
Pues sí, pero si no conoce la gente, el problema es que mate pues uno de mis compañeros, alguien conocido, pues familia. Pero yo supongo que si no lo conoce uno no siente nada.
From the outside, there's nothing more brutal than torture and murder. But to the Sinaloa sicarios, it's just a day in the office.
It's like another human being. Does that ever weigh on the conscience? You think about it?
Pues no. No es difícil porque si no lo llevan a uno.
Here's the thing, it's not either them or us. Cartels shoot first, assuming they're always in danger and obsessed with spreading the message that they're in charge. But not everyone thinks this way. And how could they use this idea to justify killing women, children, and innocent bystanders? Some soldiers are truly brainwashed.
Do you consider yourselves kind of like terrorists?
No, nomás lo que hacemos, nada de otro tipo de acto contra la sociedad que esté mal.
A couple of days ago in Culiacan, a police officer was kidnapped. I suppose to me that seemed like acts of terrorism, if you're kidnapping police.
Pues usted no sabe qué puede hacer el policía. Muchas veces es un policía corrupto que hacen cosas indebidas. Pero alguna razón haber tenido para ese hecho, no, a nadie lo levanta nomás por puras ganas.
Many police officers end up corrupted by the cartels and accept their bribes for fear of losing their lives or their families. Then the cartels consider it's okay to kill them, as they were corrupted anyway. Do you see the sad irony? So what is there to do about this? Sadly, the war on drugs only propels cartels to increase their violence and fight for profits.
More than 250,000 people have been killed since former President Felipe Calderón launched the so-called drug war in 2006, a conflict of shifting alliances and ever-increasing numbers of armed groups, dogged by persistent allegations that elements of the Mexican state are deeply intertwined with organized crime.
Shockingly, it doesn't seem like the government has the power to stop a cartel or make it crumble. The military's kingpin tactic, kill the kingpin and let the cartel split into tiny warring factions, appears to be the only successful method. This is how the once mighty Gulf cartel saw this. According to the Global Guardian, the primary actors of the Mexican drug war are the CJ&G and the Sinaloa cartels. Los Zetas, the Gulf cartel, and the Juarez cartel all contribute to the non-stop violence. And if we glorify these cartels, we also contribute.
Tenemos este que nos ha funcionado mucho, que es el Chapo Bros.
You can now listen to narco gangster rap while sporting El Chapo branded clothes.
Yeah, don't. Today, cartels spread their violence message easier than ever. Social media makes it way too easy for cartels like Sinaloa and the CJNG to reach young people across the globe. On the one hand, they share videos of torture and murder, letting watchers know they shouldn't mess with them. On the other hand, they put their kingpins on t-shirts and caps, presenting them as cool outlaw figures to be revered and respected. There's an obvious conflict here. Should we really buy products that present these kingpins in a positive light and give money to the cartel? Oh, and by the way, please don't go looking for their terrifying torture videos. Absolutely nothing prepares you for such brutality, and there is no positive outcome from watching something like this. The sad reality of Mexican cartels is, the most powerful ones are also the most brutal ones. They target anyone, from rival cartels to officers to government top dogs. And as their violence increases, the government finds it harder to face their threat. But as technology gets better and authorities discuss new tactics, let's stay hopeful that cartel brutality might just one day come to an end.
As we've seen, the cartel's reign of terror knows no bounds. They're not just targeting rivals anymore. Innocent civilians, including women and children, are being caught in the crossfire of their ruthless tactics: extortion, kidnapping for ransom, enemies' families, and wiping entire towns off the map. It's all fair game, as they'll stop at nothing to come out on top. The scale of this conflict is unlike anything we've witnessed before, with the cartel's power and brutality reaching unprecedented heights. It's clear that half measures won't cut it anymore. If we want to end this nightmare and protect the lives of countless people on both sides of the border, we'll need to hit the cartels with everything we've got. It won't be pretty, and it'll require an iron fist, but the alternative is surrendering our communities to narco terror. The time to act is now, before the violence consumes us all. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment and let me know how you think cartels should be stopped, if they can be stopped at all. And before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe.